Hello everyone, Dr. Stillman here. Today I am excited to be talking about how I use UVB light to heal patients in my practice and to help them stay healthy. I think this is one of the most exciting and underrated and underutilized modalities of medicine out there. It is simple, it is cheap, it is effective, and it beats the pants off of a lot of its competitors. However, understanding how UVB light can help or hurt you is a really, really good idea before you go out there and say, buy a Sperti vitamin D lamp and go crazy with it. All right. For the record, I'm an affiliate of Sperti's. The link below in the comments will get you a discount on the Sperti vitamin D lamp. That code, if you don't have it, is StillmanMD. I think it gives you a discount, but I could be wrong about that. And in any event, I want you guys to understand how UVB light works before you start trying to use it to heal yourself and others. I also want to mention that I've got a thyroid webinar coming up at the end of the month. Make sure you're opted into either my Substack email list or the email list over at stillmanwellness.com to get updates on that. It is going to be a game-changing webinar for those of you struggling with energy fatigue, mood, libido, weight gain, and other issues that may relate to the thyroid gland. We are going to be spilling the beans on what we learned from doing a big program with 60 people total that we took on in February, which actually ran through June, what we saw in their labs, what we learned from taking histories from them, and also coaching them through the program and getting a lot of information from them on their diet and lifestyle. I have to toot my own horn, but I'm going to be honest with you. We learned things from these people and Jim and I confirmed things from these people's histories and labs that we'd known ourselves, but that we don't hear anybody else talking about. I've never had happier patients than we had in the program. I think you should definitely tune into the webinar. It is going to be excellent. And without further ado, let's get into how I use UVB light to heal. All right. Starting with the first objection that I get from anyone who I talk about using ultraviolet type B phototherapy to treat. So first of all, what is UVB light? So UVB light is a very specific spectrum of light in the ultraviolet range. To give you a big top-down view of this, ultraviolet light is light that is higher in the spectrum than violet light. And there's UVA and UVB and UVC. UVC exists in nature in trace elements or trace amounts. You can learn more about that in Roland Van Wyck's book, Light Shaping Life. That's work of Fritz Popp, going all the way back to Alexander Gurwitch in the 1920s. I won't get any deeper into that. If you decide to fall down that rabbit hole, have fun. And don't forget to come out and get some sunlight while you're not busy reading those papers. UVB light is the spectrum of light that makes vitamin D in your skin, as well as various other effects. Ultraviolet type A light is the type of light that triggers tanning and darkening of the skin. Okay. Now, the reality is there's lots of effects of UVA, UVB light on the skin. And so I don't want to get into all those effects. We're going to get into some of them, but largely they're academic. Okay. But the key here is to understand that not all ultraviolet light is the same. A great example of this that you should know is that indoor tanning beds and tanning lamps use ultraviolet type A light. Ultraviolet type A light is the number one light that's going to create skin aging and increase your risk for skin cancer, which is why tanning booths are so strongly associated with skin cancer. But like I tell people all the time, if the sun causes skin cancer, then spoons make people fat. The story of how ultraviolet light causes skin cancer or contributes to skin cancer risk is not linear, and it's much more complex than most people have been led to believe, which is why I still use ultraviolet type B light in my practice, unlike most of my colleagues. So UVB therapy, phototherapy, is using ultraviolet B light to treat skin conditions, right? The skin is the organ that the ultraviolet type B light reaches. So why wouldn't we use it if we can get a therapeutic effect? In fact, in 1904, I believe, the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology was awarded to Niels Finsen for using ultraviolet type B light to treat skin conditions. So the first objection people give to me is, what about the risk of skin cancer? Fun fact, virtually no one can confirm an increased risk of skin cancer with the use of ultraviolet type B light. And that's very important. This is a big review of all the studies from 1966 to 2002. All studies eventually showed no increased skin cancer risk with UVB phototherapy. That's really important. Okay. That's why I have a UVB light behind me that I will use to treat my own skin and in order to maintain my vitamin D levels. I am not afraid of that light for reasons we're going to continue to talk about today. Known and potential new risk factors for skin cancer in European populations. Notice this is European populations, right? A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today pertains mostly to people who have pale skin. There is a lot of interesting and counterintuitive information out there for people who have dark skin tones on the effects of UV light on their risk of skin cancer. Newsflash, an enormous amount of skin cancer happens in people who do not have fair skin, which is part of why I say if the sun causes skin cancer, then spoons make people fat. Okay. But what are the known risk factors, particularly for pale-skinned people who, for whatever reason, make up the vast majority of my audience? So the usual associations were observed for sun exposure and pigmentation characteristics. More pale skin, more skin cancers. Chronic sun exposure being most strongly associated with squamous cell carcinoma risk, and nevi and atypical nevi with cutaneous malignant melanoma risk. Interestingly, use of ciprofloxacin was associated, that's an antibiotic, with a decreased risk of basal cell. Use of thiazides was associated with an increased risk of squamous cell. Ciprofloxacin was associated with squamous cell carcinoma and thiazines with basal cell carcinoma. I find this fascinating. These associations lost significance, so they're not a big deal. But I included them and I wanted to tell you about them because it's fascinating to think about how many things we've never bothered to test that may radically impact our risk of skin cancer. This is very hard to study. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And so there's still a lot that we have to learn about why people get skin cancer. The fact that a couple of, from my perspective, random medications significantly altered this is fascinating and only implies that there's more things we don't know and that we're going to learn about how to be healthy. Okay. Consumption of pomegranate, rich in antioxidants, was associated with decreased basal cell and squamous cell risk, which is a big, big, big part of why I tell patients who are living in hot, sunny environments, you need to eat colorful fruits and vegetables. Today I had some mango, I had some tart cherry extract, I had some lemonade, I had some supplemental vitamin C. I'm going to have lots of green leafy vegetables and carrots and all kinds of deeply, darkly pigmented things rich in antioxidants today for this reason. It's a big part of why when people tell me they're going to go keto or they're going to go carnivore and they live in some tropical latitude, that I caution them against this, particularly if they have a fair skin type. You know, if you're from a Southern European ancestry, Italy, Spain, if you've got ancestry from a tropical latitude, Southeast Asia, Africa, South America, Central America, you're likely to have genetics and natural skin pigmentation that allow you to tolerate these higher and higher loads of solar radiation. But if you are pale like me, because all of your genetics are from Northern Europe, where it's very dark most of the year, and even when it's not dark, it's pretty cloudy, you're really playing with fire when you start to get into sunburn and really excessive sun exposure, as we're going to talk about. But bear in mind, there's really clear risk factors for this, and it's not as simple as just getting lots of sun, okay? So one of the risk factors for skin cancer that I think is underreported and underdiscussed is shift work. What does shift work mean? It means working at night. Look at this. Our dose response analysis demonstrated that the risk of melanoma cumulatively increases by 2% for every year of shift work. I think that's fascinating, right? So 2%, if you spend 10 years of your life as a nocturnist doctor, that means a doctor who works at night, or as a night shift nurse, 10 years, you increased your risk of melanoma by 20%, but nobody is out there shouting from the housetops that shift work causes skin cancer, right? Maybe we should be. One thing I forgot to mention, recent experience of stressful events was associated with increased risk of skin cancer particularly cutaneous melanoma, which is a big reason why I constantly harp in my coaching programs, which you can find more in the links below, about psychosocial, psychological stress and having appropriate support systems in place. I don't think that's ever been more important. As people become digitally disconnected from other people, that's very bad for your mental health. You need to have a healthy, emotional, psychosocial life. It's never been easier. In some ways, it's never been harder, but it's also, I think, never been more important. So, shift work, bad for you. Why is it bad for you? More on that later. The idea that we should avoid the sun is, I think, a very flawed idea. It's a very dangerous idea, and I want to explain why I think it's dangerous. This is the melanoma in southern Sweden cohort trial, a landmark study in the history of vitamin D, solar exposure, and skin cancer and cancer in general research. So what they did is they followed all these Swedish women in a 20-year trial called the melanoma in southern Sweden cohort. This is a broad range of women in terms of age. And what they found, and remember, these are white women almost exclusively, right? Because Sweden is one of the whitest countries in the world. So if you're listening to this, I don't know how these numbers change in Kenya or Chad or Thailand, because no one's ever done this study there. Okay. The other thing you would need to know is that even if you change the latitude that people come from, you got to keep in mind the latitude they're at, right? So changing your behavior in Sweden, where in the summer you might have a 16-hour day, and in the winter you might have an 8-hour day, is not the same as having a 12-hour photo period on the equator, day after day, week after week, month after month, year round. Anyway, women with active sun exposure habits were mainly at a lower risk of cardiovascular disease and non-cancer, non-cardiovascular disease death as compared to those who avoided sun exposure. Translation: women who actively seek out the sun have a lower risk of death. As a doctor who is an internist and whose primary goal, as stated by my patients, is to help them look good and feel good for as long as possible, that's a really big deal. I take avoiding death very seriously, if you didn't know that. As a result of their increased survival, the relative contribution of cancer death increased in these women. So technically from this study, you could say getting more sun increases your risk of dying of cancer, but it's because you're living long enough to get the cancer, okay? Non-smokers who avoided sun exposure had a life expectancy similar to smokers in the highest sun exposure group, indicating that avoidance of sun exposure is a risk factor for death of a similar magnitude as smoking. Compared to the highest sun exposure group, life expectancy of avoiders of sun exposure was reduced by 0.6 to 2.1 years. So avoiding the sun is going to take 0.6 to 2.1 years off of your life. How about them apples, right? All of a sudden, the sun causing skin cancer doesn't seem like such a problem, does it? But let's drill down into what this really means, okay? So in order to determine what these, because they said, no sun exposure or sun avoidance, some sun exposure, some more sun exposure, and then lots of sun exposure, right? How did they determine that? Here were the questions they posed. How often do you sunbathe during the summertime? Do you sunbathe during the winter, such as on vacation to the mountains? Do you use tanning beds? Do you go abroad on vacation to swim and sunbathe? Okay. So what you're seeing here is that this is not a simple linear distribution, right? Like, for example, this doesn't capture whether someone works outside every day, does it? It just captures their recreational sunbathing and tanning bed use. The tanning beds introduce what I consider to be a massive confounding variable, because using a tanning booth and saying that that's the equivalent of sun exposure is not the same as saying sun exposure, because the sun includes lots of different frequencies of light in different combinations and has many beneficial effects, as we're going to talk about. So again, I don't think this is the be all end all, but here's the kicker. I cannot tell you how much sun exposure is going to increase your risk of death. To my knowledge, no one has ever in the literature at any point documented that getting more sun did anything but reduce your risk of death, which means that I don't have a good reason to tell any of you to limit your sun exposure. It may increase your risk of skin cancer. Certainly for many of you with certain skin types and genetic predispositions and histories, it will. But the question of whether or not and how much sun you should get has to be tailored to the individual based upon many different factors, which we're going to discuss today. More food for thought. Okay. Blue LED light exposure develops intracellular reactive oxygen species, lipid peroxidation, and subsequent cellular injuries in cultured bovine retinal pigment epithelial cells. Translation: blue LED light produces a lot of the same cellular damage and skin pathology in retinal pigment epithelial cells, which are cells of the eye, that we would expect from sunlight. Okay. These results suggest that, at least in part, oxidative stress is an early step leading to cellular damage. Blue LED exposure, cellular oxygen damage, because blue light exposure at a low dose. What it means is that indoor lighting is likely contributing to modern skin and ocular diseases, which, if you didn't know, are skyrocketing in prevalence and severity. The other day, I spoke to a patient who spontaneous vision at 30 has not become, it's become common. People need to be aware of that. Sun avoidance may actually be tanking or destroying the health of your skin and your eyes, even though you don't perceive it as being bad for those organs. Another paper on this: blue light induced oxidative stress in live skin. Skin damage from exposure to sunlight induces aging-like changes in appearance and is attributed to the UV component of light. Photosensitized production of ROS, reactive oxygen species, by UVA light is widely accepted to contribute to skin damage and carcinogenesis, but visible light is thought not to do so. Translation: most doctors and scientists think that UVA light and UV light in general ages the skin and makes you look old and get skin cancer. However, in this study, blue light induced oxidative stress preferentially in mitochondria, but green, red, far infrared, and infrared light did not. Blue light induced oxidative stress was also detected in cultured human keratinocytes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What that means is blue light can have some of the same skin damaging properties as ultraviolet light. That's very, very important. All right. These results suggest that blue light contributes to skin aging similarly to UVA. How about them apples? Most of you watching this, if you're watching this indoors under LED or fluorescent lighting, which is what most of you are going to be under, if not now, then in the future, thanks to the dearly enlightened government that we are blessed and cursed with, who have seen fit to outlaw the safest form of indoor lighting, otherwise known as incandescent lighting. You're being baked in blue light right now that's not balanced by the proper densities of red and infrared light, which is one reason why I'm a huge fan of the sauna space light bulbs, and why I use my sauna space every single day as much as I can. Not as much as I can. That makes it sound like I use it a ton. I try to get in there every day. Okay, increased UVA exposure. Oh, I didn't think this was that interesting. Hold on a minute. This part's interesting, though. Cutaneous malignant melanoma has been increasing at a steady exponential rate in fair-skinned indoor workers since before 1940. This is setting the stage for this whole melanoma paradox. A paradox exists between indoor and outdoor workers because indoor workers get 3 to 9 times less solar ultraviolet light. We'd like to point out that this was written 15 years ago. This number is probably outdated. Exposure than outdoor workers, yet only indoor workers have an increasing risk of cutaneous malignant melanoma. Translation: if you are an electrical line worker, a construction worker, a farm worker, if you work outside every single day in a consistent light environment, it does not increase your risk of skin cancer. If you are a white-collar desk jockey who lives indoors 97% of the time, and the most sun you get is when you stumble out of your cabana in Cancun during your spring break trip in order to fall into a drunken stupor or hungover stupor on the beach, after which you get fried like a lobster, you are the one to get cutaneous malignant melanoma, and blaming the sun for this is very myopic. Your problem isn't sun. Your problem is intermittent sun exposure, a lack of consistent sun exposure. Otherwise, the guy who's fixing the electrical telephone pole outside of your office, the guy who's constructing your house or renovating your office outside, whatever it may be, that guy would have the same risk and increasing risk of cutaneous malignant melanoma to you, but they don't. Okay? They looked at different factors in this because they hypothesized that one factor is indoor exposure to UVA, which does pass through windows, which can cause blah, 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 blah. A lot of this is very academic. I found it interesting that they did find that indoor solar UVA radiances represent about 25% of the outdoor radiances. I actually didn't know that. What that means is that UVA is coming into the indoor environment through our windows, and it's prematurely aging people's skin, and it's not balanced by UVB, which produces vitamin D. Okay, melanoma and sun exposure. I want to put a really fine point on it so all of you get it 100% and there's no confusion. So this is an overview of melanoma and sun exposure and what we know from the literature. There was a significant positive association for intermittent exposure. Like I was saying, if you get out into the sun intermittently and not consistently, you are increasing your risk for skin cancer, period, full stop. A significantly reduced risk for heavy occupational exposure. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What does that mean? If you get a ton of sunlight as part of your day job, like you're sun up to sundown outside, you have a significantly reduced risk. I think that's fascinating. A small, marginally significant excess risk for total exposure. There was a significantly increased risk with sunburn at all ages or in adult life. So you must avoid sunburn. Some people hear me say, get more sun, and they may be, as pale as a sheet of paper and think that this means they need to go bake or roast in strong tropical light. That's not what I'm saying. If you have the skin type where you go outside on a hot summer's day in Florida and you burst into flames, then you need to get as much as you can without burning. And if that's 5 minutes where you are, fine. What I care about most is that you don't burn, because burns always increase your risks later in life. I didn't know this when I learned about the health effects or benefits of sunlight, and I got some wicked bad burns based on some really half-baked advice from some really crazy influencers. And I wish I hadn't, because I just got diagnosed with a atypical nevus that was taken out, and they didn't get all of it. So I have to go back for another revision surgery on Thursday. And I'm not exactly excited about this. So learn from my mistakes. I try everything kind of, I get pretty excessive with my health and wellness habits. Let me make the mistakes and then tell you how to not make them once I figured it out. Okay. Anyway. Yeah, I think that about sums that up. Narrowband UV phototherapy in skin conditions beyond psoriasis. That concludes the part where I talk about what's really causing the increasing rates of melanoma, because I think it's indoor lighting, processed food, a sedentary lifestyle, and intermittent rather than consistent sun exposure, for the record. There are other factors beyond that. Like I could do probably a whole thing on radio wave and microwave radiation and skin cancer, because I think there's a very interesting link. But that's a long story, and I didn't have time to incorporate it today. Anyway, now we're going to talk about how we can incorporate UVB phototherapy into clinical practice. So narrowband UVB phototherapy in skin conditions beyond psoriasis. Psoriasis is the #1 condition for which UVB is being used today, I believe. Some of you could debate that, but I don't want to. It's not very interesting. So lots of people with psoriasis are using UVB phototherapy. But what else can we use it for? Atopic dermatitis, vitiligo, polymorphic light eruption, cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, chronic urticaria, lichen planus, pruritus associated with polycythemia vera, seborrheic dermatitis, actinic prurigo, and acquired perforating dermatosis. These are not, some of these are common. Atopic dermatitis, very common. Vitiligo, fairly common. T-cell lymphoma, rare. Chronic urticaria, very common. Lichen planus, relatively common, but not that common. Polycythemia vera, rare. Seborrheic dermatitis, rare. Prurigo, rare. Acquired perforating dermatosis, I've literally never seen or heard of it. So that gives you some idea of how rare some of these problems are. But chances are you know somebody with one of these illnesses, and a lot of them are not being educated to the point that this is an option for them, okay? How well does UVB work? Okay. I wouldn't use it if it didn't give us a significant clinical response. And if you know anything about me, you know that I tend to attract patients who are very wary of the medical industrial complex. They understand that when somebody produces a blockbuster drug for one of these skin diseases, they can make crazy amounts of money on it before anybody figures out that, oh, well, sorry, that increased your risk of thyroid cancer. Our bad. Oh, well, that increased your risks of some other illness that you really didn't want to get. Sorry, too bad. We broke you, but we didn't buy you. So you'll have to get your health insurance to pick that up and hope that you get a good outcome. UVB, in contrast, because we've been using it for over 100 years now, We know what it does. We know what the downsides are. And as I just documented, it doesn't increase your risk of skin cancer when you're using it to treat these skin conditions. So as far as I'm concerned, if I had any of these conditions, UVB light would be something that I would immediately grab for. Okay. But there's a little bit more to that. I want to talk a little bit more about the risks and benefits later, because it's not just as simple, oh, you got a skin problem, throw UVB light at it. Okay. But mycosis fungoides, this is a rare skin condition. I have seen this once in my private practice. And if I saw it in the hospital when I was working for other people, I don't remember it. It's a rare skin condition, okay? Which is why when you look at a lot of these cases or studies on this, it's like we evaluated 60 patients or whatever. And in this case, they had 13 patients had a complete response to UVB phototherapy. 7, 30% had a partial response. 4, 16% approximately had no response. That's a really good deal, because mycosis fungoides is a bad disease. You don't want it to progress. You don't want to have it. You want to get rid of it as soon as possible. So getting a 54% complete response, I'll take those odds any day. Okay. Some people, after discontinuing treatment, had a relapse. Mean time was in 12.5 weeks. They don't comment on whether or not they were able to get it under control afterwards. Okay. UVB treatment for cutaneous lichen planus, 50 patients. Again, complete response was achieved in 70% and 85% of those who were still in remission after a median of 34.7 months. That's great. That's a great rate of response. Okay, progressive extragenital lichen sclerosis. I've seen this in private practice. I've used UVB light to treat it. It is effective. And in this case, they used thrice weekly narrowband UVB and got complete resolution after only 3 phototherapy sessions. I bring up this case report in particular. Why? Because this was a case where they were using the typical topical therapies and it didn't work for the patient. And they started reaching for more and more and more different things. And in the case of this that I saw in my private practice last year, what I'll tell you is that we threw this at it and it really helped. And otherwise, this was not headed in a good direction. And there's still issues. I'm still concerned about this case, but narrowband UVB at least bought them some time and is giving them some therapeutic benefit. So let's talk a little bit more about skin cancer risk, because I think it's very important for people to understand some of the numbers, like big picture, 50,000 foot view here as they're making decisions about what light to put their skin under. So interestingly, and this gets lost in the shuffle with skin cancer data, 7,500 in round number deaths will be attributed to melanoma in the US in 2022. 7,500, 7,600. That's not a lot of people, for the record. Okay. Another fun fact, food for thought. Indoor tanning devices can emit UV radiation in amounts 10 to 15 times higher than the sun at its peak intensity. That is bananas. I mean, that is crazy, right? This is another reason why I say, telling people that, the indoor tanning beds are the same as the sun is crazy. It's just not the same. 3.4 million people die in the United States each year in round numbers. Okay. It's plus or minus a few to several hundred thousand. It can vary a lot. Okay. But what I want to put in perspective here is I just told you 7,600 people in general die of melanoma every year. And 3.4 million people die each year. Look at the leading causes of death. All of them are associated with low vitamin D levels, an indoor sedentary lifestyle, a lack of being outside and getting sunlight. Okay. So I'm very concerned for people who hear the sun causes skin cancer, therefore I should stay indoors and avoid it at all costs. Staying indoors and leading an indoor lifestyle is a recipe for premature death and disease. If that's what you want in life, go ahead and stay inside. All right. One more thing I want to tell you guys about, which is the duration of the dose. Very important to talk about. So this is from one paper on at-home UVB light treatment for psoriasis, or in the office treatment for with UVB for psoriasis. Each phototherapy appointment usually lasts about 15 minutes. Some will require up to 30 minutes. For the record, to keep your vitamin D level tippity-tip top, you might only use 5 minutes on that Sperti Vitamin D lamp. I use that intermittently every couple days, every 3 days, plus sun exposure, and my vitamin D levels are consistently between 40 and 70 or 80 sometimes. So my point is this: that light, if all the UVB light that we talked about in the prior studies don't increase your risk of skin cancer, that little guy over there at 5 minutes, a couple of times a week, every day at most, if you live in a really cold, dark place with no UV light, you really think that's going to move the needle on your skin cancer risk? Give me a break. Okay. And my point with this is also simply that if you've got an illness that responds to UVB light, 15 to 30 minutes a day is a manageable treatment duration if you want to get it under control using natural therapies. If I had psoriasis, if I had atopic dermatitis, if I had vitiligo, if I had a lot of the problems that respond to UVB light and I lived in a dark place where there wasn't a lot of sunlight, you better believe that's one of the things that I would invest in. So this is a great, great summary, box one of this paper. This paper is fantastic. Considering the potential benefits as well as adverse effects of sun exposure, can all the potential benefits be provided by oral vitamin D supplementation? The question here is, okay, we know that vitamin D is good for you. It's a vitamin. That means it's important for normal, healthy physiology, right? You can make it from UVB light. However, UVB light, as we've discussed, has some downsides, particularly if you've got really fair skin and are susceptible to skin damage, right? However, taking a vitamin D supplement may not have the same therapeutic effects as maintaining a normal vitamin D level with ultraviolet light. This goes back to what I was talking about when it gets down to UVA and UVB and all their effects. They're not just producing vitamin D. They're having these complex effects on your HPA axis. And that's why I'm not a fan of vitamin D supplementation alone. I may use it as part of an overall strategy, but I often am reaching for UVB light instead, which is why I decided to make this video. And box one in this paper really goes over why this is such a big deal. So we're going to go through it point by point. Arguments for vitamin D supplementation of food. Widespread reach to people in the community without them having to take any action. It's very easy. I'm not a big fan of vitamin D supplementation in food, for the record, right? But these are the arguments for it. It's easy to do. It could treat a lot of vitamin D insufficiency or deficiency. It could be very important for high-risk groups, the elderly, people with deep pigmentation, et cetera, et cetera. Be aware that people are adding vitamin D to your food. And if you don't want this, screen your food and make sure you're not eating it. Personally, I don't like vitamin D fortification of food, particularly for me, because I have other ways of getting my vitamin D. Okay. Arguments against vitamin D supplementation of food, and this applies to supplements as well. Cannot be sure what dose is being delivered and who is getting it. So this isn't true of supplements, although there is a lot of variability between supplements. But the other piece of this is that you don't all absorb vitamin D from food or supplements the same. Those of you who've got gallbladder issues, you can't digest fat-soluble vitamins well, you may be throwing your vitamin D, or you may as well be throwing your vitamin D tablet or capsule or oil into the trash because you're not digesting it. We'll see low vitamin D levels in people who are taking vitamin D supplements occasionally. It's not a low enough risk. It's not a zero risk. Some of you are actually having low vitamin D levels because of this. This is why I like to check vitamin D levels on labs. It's all well and good to say, well, I'm taking 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 IU a day. I know, but is it a good supplement, and are you actually absorbing it? Because the real measure and the proof of the pudding is really in your serum level, as far as I'm concerned. There are excessive doses. The only people I've seen with vitamin D toxicity are people who are taking pills and supplements, and I'm not a fan of that. You know, it's possible. I've only seen it done by doctors who didn't use a lot of vitamin D clinically. The only two cases I can think of that resulted in hospitalization were people who were consuming 50,000 IU of vitamin D2 a day, which is why I never use that therapeutic. And I'm very skeptical of doctors who do. Okay. However, here's why I like UV radiation for this. Toxic levels of vitamin D don't occur. You cannot develop vitamin D toxicity from the sun. There are beneficial effects of UV rays that are not mediated through vitamin D. It's cheap, it's easy, it's widely available, and current sun avoidance messages are probably not appropriate, especially for particular populations. People who have very dark skin, people who live at a high latitude, people who have a largely indoor lifestyle. Like I said, sun avoidance is not good. Okay. It's a dangerous risk for death equivalent to smoking. So you've got to think about this. What's the optimal strategy for you? This is what I try to coach people into good answers to in my coaching programs, which is why we spend a lot of time coaching people. You don't need me to prescribe you vitamin D necessarily. You don't need me to monitor your levels even, although I recommend that you have someone do that. You need someone to walk you through, okay, who are you? Where do you live? What is your lifestyle like? What's your supplementation regimen? What have your labs looked like in the past? And help you explain, okay, how should I go ahead and get my vitamin D? And what are the other possible benefits of ultraviolet light? Okay. All right. Enough about that. Last thing, what about vitamin D and mortality? Okay. This is a great study on lots of different trials with vitamin D supplementation. Vitamin D supplementation alone was not associated with all-cause mortality in adults compared with placebo or no treatment. That's a very important, very carefully worded statement. Vitamin D supplementation, that's not the same as vitamin D level. It's also not the same as ultraviolet light exposure. So when people say, I'm going to take vitamin D to get the benefit of sun exposure, this is not the same. This is like saying, I am going to think about walking outside to get the benefits of walking outside. They're not the same. Okay. So that may not be the best example or metaphor, but I want you to understand, looking at vitamin D levels, you almost always see that the higher the level, the better off the population is in terms of various factors: mortality from different diseases, morbidity, life expectancy, etc. But that doesn't mean that correcting the level, i.e. giving them a supplement, changes their risk factors. What is all this building towards? What am I getting at? Okay. We see that with increasing sun exposure, your risk of death drops and your risk of many diseases drops. We don't see that same drop with vitamin D supplementation. So I'm very wary of people saying, I don't need to get any sun. All I need to do is go outside, I don't need to get any sun. All I need to do is take a vitamin D supplement. This is very flawed thinking. It does not bear out in the literature. What you will see is that vitamin D supplementation reduces the risk of death by cancer by 15%. This association in the literature is so robust and so strong that I am now seeing even conventional oncologists who are extremely skeptical of nutrition and supplementation recommending 10,000 IU of vitamin D a day to their active cancer patients or patients who are being surveilled for possible recurrence of cancer. So all of this is very interesting stuff. I love talking about it. I think it is very, very important. I hope that makes it very clear how I use UVB in my practice. To reiterate and summarize, when a patient's got a skin condition that's been documented to respond to UVB light and other therapies that they're interested in and willing to try haven't worked to get it under control, that's when I'll say, hey, listen, you may want to consider a Sperti Vitamin D lamp or some other form of UVB therapy, because there's tons of lamps out there. And, particularly if you've got something like whole body psoriasis or mycosis fungoides, it's not going to give you that little lamp back there is not practical for treating the whole body. That's where getting a dermatologist, talking to them. And honestly, I can't recommend UVB light for everybody, which is why I'm not out here just saying, all of you buy this Sperti Vitamin D lamp, right? I can't recommend it to all of you because I don't know all of you and all of you have a unique context. But I think that considering how you could use it is really wise, because you can use it to avoid having to take vitamin D supplements indefinitely. You can use it to treat diseases that are not responding to standards of care. Or if you're very averse to using drugs because you've had bad experiences in the past, or you're mistrustful, or you look at the side effects and they scare you, you can use the UVB light and often get a better clinical result. So again, I hope that's very helpful. Drop your questions and comments in the comments below. I have a premium Substack Q&A to get to with my premium subscribers on my Substack. If you didn't know, I have a Substack newsletter. This is part of the Monday Masterclass for that Substack. If you want to get regular updates of this, either hit the notification or subscribe button for my channel, or you can subscribe to my Substack, which is stillmanmd.substack.com. And for $20 a month, you get a 30 to 45 minute Q&A with me every Monday afternoon at approximately 3:30 p.m. But I'm so chronically late that it seems like every single time I run over by 10 to 15 minutes. So it ends up being 3:45. I think that's enough. Sign up for the thyroid webinar. It's going to be the bomb. We're going to blow up a lot of myths. We're going to blow a lot of minds. We're going to have a really good time, and you will really enjoy it. Take care, everyone. Have a great day, and don't forget to get outside.